I wonder when we're finally on the other side of this pandemic, if there will be any annual rituals to mark the harrowing experience that we've all lived through. I'm sure there will be novels and blockbuster movies and documentaries about these days or decades, as was the case with March. Until I saw it in Downton Abbey, I never learned about the 1918 flu pandemic, which lasted over 2 years and infected a third of the world's population. I can't tell you how many times I've heard the phrase, "We're living through unprecedented times," which is true and not. The human race has strived and survived through countless tragedies and pandemics before. And if we allow the past to fade into the folds of history, we often find ourselves repeating it. Which is why I'm pro-ritual. There are some times in life when a person or a community takes action against forgetting. They create annual remembrances, museums, or monuments to mark the passage of time and teach the future generations what happened, how far we've come. Each year, I see my New York City friends post photos of the twin lights that rise high into the night sky where the Twin Towers used to be before 9/11. The catchphrase is never forget. On transition anniversaries, I see some of my trans friends post before and current photographs in order to celebrate how far they've come in regards to embodying their true gender identity. Rituals designate sacred space and time. Krista Tippett, in her book, Becoming Wise, An Inquiry into the Mystery of Art and Living, says this: "So many wise teachers among us apprehend the truths of life from an edge of illness or crisis, where the view is suddenly so stark and so clear. They come back wounded and more whole than before, all at the same time, not cured, but healing, and embodying the mystical ideas that seem strange as abstractions and turn out to be common sense. The core of life is about losses and deaths, both subtle and catastrophic, over and over again, and also about loving and rising again. The cancer, the car accident, these are the extreme experiences of other trajectories we're on. Aging, the loss of love, the death of dreams, the child leaving home. Grief and gladness, sickness and health are not separate passages. They're entwined and grow from and through each other, planting us, if we'll let them, more profoundly in our bodies, in all their flaws and their grace. There's a reason why when my son, who's 6, is crying, needs a hug. It's not just that he needs my love. He needs a boundary around his experience. He needs to know that the pain is contained and can be housed, and it won't be limiting his whole being. The Hebrews needed a boundary around their suffering of slavery, a ritual to teach the children who they were and what they'd survived. Also, what their God was like. Their God not only created the heavens and the earth, but also brought them out of slavery in Egypt. Years ago, Pharaoh had declared a death sentence on all male Hebrew children. But on the particular night, which would one day become the Passover ritual, God saved them from a plague. Plague after plague befell the Egyptians. It looked like 2020 out there. Water turned to blood. Households were infested with frogs, lice, flies, and murder hornets. The livestock died. Hail hailed down. Boils covered their skin. The sky went dark. The last and worst plague was death itself. But God spared the Hebrew households from this pandemic. Death would pass over their doorposts and not reach its hands around the bodies of their beloveds, as it had done so many times before. The instructions were clear. Every Hebrew family should take an animal from the flock. If your household was too small for a whole animal, you should join up with your next door neighbor. Don't waste food. Don't leave anyone out. Begin your preparations at sunset. Mark every household with the blood of an unblemished lamb or goat. Eat the roasted animal with unleavened bread and bitter herbs. Don't allow leftovers, but eat with your belt buckled, your sandals ready, and your staff in hand. Once death passes overhead, it's time for liberation. And so every year the people gather and retell this story. They eat the same foods and tell the tale of a God who not only creates, but forced Pharaoh to let my people go. They practice never forgetting. One day you may need to be ready at a moment's notice. Death will pass over and the coast will be clear. Don't wait for the yeast to rise in the bread. There may be no yeast available for a 100-mile radius. When the time is right, you have to seize your liberation and bring as many with you as possible. It was this very ritual and commemoration of Hebrew liberation that Jesus was celebrating with his friends during a meal, which would turn out to be his last. He and his friends made the journey to Jerusalem in order to never forget. They obtained the traditional foods and sat around a table in an upper room. They remembered how their people were once enslaved in Egypt. They told the story of how their God was not only a creator, but a liberator, who again and again enters human history and breaks whatever chains are binding. This time, the ritual of sacrificing an unblemished lamb and using its blood to mark the house so that death would pass over, well, this practice took on a life of its own. There were no Hebrew slaves per se in Jerusalem, but the ruling powers enslaved the poor through economic policies, taxation, and traditions of outcasting the marginalized. If God truly was a God of liberation, perhaps this God would again enter human history and break these chains. The sacred ritual and boundary of Passover took on new meaning for the followers of Jesus after that night. In particular, they remembered the ways he blessed and held and broke and shared the traditional food and drink. And as a good teacher does, he expounded upon God's liberating action and said that liberation manifests when we love one another. He said, especially in the ways that I have shown you love and liberate by feeding the hungry. Love and liberate by healing the sick. Love and liberate by welcoming the stranger. Love and liberate with holy anger by overturning tables which nickel and dime the poor to death. Love and liberate through forgiveness. And just like that, Jesus communed with the whole wide world. Today, in most Christian churches, we're celebrating World Communion Sunday, the first Sunday of October. This tradition began in 1933 and grew out of division within the church. To overcome that division, a new ritual began, one of recognizing the interconnectedness of all congregations, the importance of ecumenical unity. I won't lie, I'm sad to miss being together in person, breaking and tasting breads from around the world. The challah, the wheat, braided, multigrain, gluten-free, rye, King's Hawaiian, and wafer. Instead of dwelling on what we won't be tasting together this year, I'll let the meal in my household be a boundary around our experience. May it be a hug for our stomachs, a container to soothe the pain we've survived thus far. And one day, hopefully sooner than later, #wearyourmask, we'll be out of Egypt and on the other side of this plague. We'll gather together around tables with laughter and tears. We'll light the candles, we'll pass the plates, and we'll teach our children about the harrowing experience that was 2020. We will remember and honor those who didn't make it through. We will recommit ourselves to liberation and to love. We'll make sure no food goes to waste and that everyone around us has something to eat. We'll follow in Jesus' footsteps and commune with the whole wide world. May it be so. Amen.